I'm assuming that we're taking those separately. They are legislative, which will be making recommendations to the city council. The question was brought up by Commissioner Labonte about the order in which they're presented. Seeing how the one is contingent on the other, even though the recommendation, should we take the housing needs analysis before?
That's fine. We can definitely do that. We have one presentation for both, so we figured if there was comments in the first hearing that pertain to the second hearing, we jot them down, respond to them, but then circle back and make sure. So we will definitely give the presentation and then focus on the HNA, but I assume some other topics might come up during that discussion.
So they still will be completely separate hearings. Okay.
Well, I feel like they're going to intertwine just out of the way things are. The reason we kept them separate is so that we have two adopting ordinances.
Two hearings, yeah.
Yes,
fine.
yes, thank you.
Okay, could we get the description of the public hearing process and the appeal process, please?
Thank you. The North Plains Planning Commission will conduct a legislative public hearing regarding file CPA 23-056(2) Housing Needs Analysis Update. The order of business will be as follows. The commission chair will open the public hearing and request a staff report. The commissioners may ask questions at any time during the public hearing. Any written correspondence submitted on behalf of this item will be orally presented, including the individual's name and address. The public will be invited to provide oral and written testimony on the proposed housing needs analysis update. Additional staff comments will then be presented. The commission chair will call for commission comments and discussion. The commission chair will close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a specific time and date. All persons testifying shall be deemed parties to the proceeding and must provide their name and full correct mailing address, or if preferred, their email address. Parties will be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the code and state law. The city municipal code, zoning, and development standards specify applicable criteria to be relied upon in making a decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact, or to other state or city land use standards that the person testifying believes applies to this proposed housing needs analysis update. Failure to raise an issue in person or in writing with sufficient detail to afford the hearing body and parties to the hearing an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals.
Okay, thank you. We will open the public hearing at 7:06 for city file number CPA 23-056 housing needs analysis. Since this is legislative and we will be making recommendations to city council, there is no ex parte contact or bias or so if I could please get the staff report summary.
Yes, it's going to be in two phases, Chair. I will just start very briefly and then turn it over to our consultant. As has been noted, we have two staff reports tonight. One is for the UGB expansion as it relates to the amendments necessary to the comp plan, and the other staff report is for the housing needs analysis. Both of those were in your packet. In addition to that, we also have some additional supporting documents that are part of the packet, as well as the map that came from the PAC meetings, I should say. In addition to that, we did receive a letter from Rudy Cadlew, and his letter was also included as part of your packet. In addition to those letters, today we received a letter from the city of Hillsborough at 4:06 that I've entered into the record and provided you a copy of. We also received a letter from Thousand Friends of Oregon at 5:06 p.m. today. I've also included that in the record and have placed a copy on your desk. And that is really going to conclude what I have for you tonight, and I'll be turning it over to our consultant to provide the rest of the staff report. If you have any questions, Anita, I'm happy to take any questions you have at this time.
I do have one question for staff on hearing on this. We have a commissioner that owns land in the expansion area. And while the housing needs analysis is probably something he wouldn't need to recuse himself from, he might need to for the UGB expansion.
Specifically on the issue of the UGB expansion, given that property owner may own lands recommended to be brought in, it would be best on that issue that person recused himself.
So
On the
just-
housing needs analysis, probably not an issue.
Okay, all right, thank you. Want to go ahead and continue with the staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair King. Can we bring up the PowerPoint? Are you, we're working on that? Okay. I'll stall for a moment. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Austin and this is Steve Fauster with 3J Consulting. We're helping the city with the UGB expansion project and with housing needs analysis. For the record, we're at 9600 Southwest Nimbus Avenue, Suite 100, Beaverton, Oregon, 97008. And we have a presentation this evening, and I'll just go ahead and give touch on the background that Chair King and Commissioner Levante raised about having two separate public hearings where this information really overlaps fairly significantly. But it was the guidance of the city attorney to separate them into two separate hearings so that we have two separate recommendations that go forward to city council for two separate approvals that can then be two separate ordinances. And then if one is challenged, the other does not necessarily get challenged as well. So it helps the city be able to separate those two for that purpose. The first couple slides are just text, so I'll just go ahead and go over them. They're not very exciting anyway.
Unfortunately, the cloud isn't working. We're not able to get it to
Okay.
into the folder.
Well, I will start with just an overview of this project, which many of you have been part of from the beginning. The UGB Project Advisory Committee, which we call the UGB PAC, began meeting in August of 2020, and they met 8 times over the course of about 2.5 years. The PAC included representatives from Planning Commission, yourselves, City Council, Parks Board, Economic Development Committee, local business, and agency representatives, including ODOT, DLCD, and Washington County. The UGB PAC oversaw the creation of the UGB expansion report that will be the subject of our second public hearing this evening, which was based in part on the HNA that we're discussing now. And then I'll give some background on the UGB expansion report because the presentation's all one, even though we are focused on the HNA right now. But the report that's before you for the UGB this evening is based on establishing the land need of what the city will need to accommodate both employment and residential need over the next 20 years. And then determining where we should look to expand that area. Analyzing the area available to us to expand, which in our case, the North Plains is undesignated land, not rural reserves or urban reserves. Evaluation of the urbanization potential. How well we can turn this into urbanized land. And then determine the size and location of where we expand the UGB. We do get into a few graphics here in the presentation next. Right, looks like progress. I'll just mention while we're waiting too, that the H&A, the housing needs analysis, is the city's factual basis for determining how much residential land need the city will need over the next 20 years. And this planning commission, in 2022 did adopt some land use efficiency measures to be able to accommodate a little bit of that need within the city limits. North Plains is fairly built out. The current UGB and current city limits don't have a lot of residential land growth potential. But adopting land use efficiency measures does help to use the land that is available a little more efficiently and potentially accommodate some of that need within. Even without, which in the H&A, I think it lists 1,300 units of housing needed. About 600 of those were accommodated through the Bryn Hill development, which has come online since the original date of that. So the leftover, if you will, the need that will occur over the next 20 years is about 790 housing units. And those housing units can take any shape or size, single family, detached, duplex, triplex, townhomes, multifamily, cottage cluster, manufactured homes. So all of those housing units together, we make some base assumptions in the housing needs analysis of how that might develop. We look at some different density scenarios and come up with some base numbers of how we determine how many acres the city should expand by. In addition to that, we looked at the Parks and Recreation Master Plan to determine how much parkland we could accommodate for with that residential growth. So we are looking at approximately 167 acres of land need identified in the H&A that would accommodate residential development, parks, and infrastructure. Also noted in your H&A is that there's no need to accommodate expansion for schools. The Hillsborough School District has identified that they are fully able to provide capacity in the existing new elementary, in the middle schools that currently serve the city that are located in Hillsborough and then in the high school.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
We always talk about a 20-year supply of land.
Right.
We started this a couple years ago.
Yes.
We keep updating it.
Right.
And then usually when we adopt it, it's less than 20 years.
Yep.
How does that work and how do you keep sliding that, or do you have to stop at a certain time?
That's a great question. Yeah, we do have to stop at a certain point so that we can sort of align it with our EOA, our economic opportunities analysis, and make sure that we're accommodating a snapshot in time. However, we originally did the H&A in 2017, which isn't that long ago, but we have to base our growth of population on the Portland State University Population Research Center's growth forecasts that are certified. And that doesn't happen every year. The last time it happened for North Plains was in 2020. And because that was after our 2017 H&A, to be able to base our growth need and our UGB on our H&A, we had to update the numbers with the 2020 population. If another population estimate occurred before we finished all this, I don't know the answer if we'd have to update that.
I think the next population forecast is scheduled for 2024, but as long as we give DLCD notice before another population projection comes out, we base it on the 2020 projection.
So the numbers that are in the H&A are the locked-in time frame and population estimates that we base the need analysis on. I will just keep moving on. I just have a graphic about how the urban growth boundary expansion area is determined. We talked a little about the need from the housing needs analysis. Just recently, end of 2022, we adopted an economic opportunities analysis, and that's where we identified our growth that's needed for our employment lands, including infrastructure. And then you take those two numbers of need and subtract out capacity of the current UGB. There is a little more employment land capacity than there is residential. And that's where we come up with our 855.2 acres of overall land in the UGB expansion area. Here's where I'll note that the 855 acres is a polygon surrounding the current city limits, and we don't at this stage need to determine where different uses happen, where the residential occurs, where the employment occurs, where there might be parks. That's coming next. After we get this UGB report adopted, then we go into what's called concept planning. And that's where the fun land use process begins, where we get to start determining where things will happen, where higher density residential will occur as stated a need in the H&A, where the slightly lesser dense areas will be, where it makes sense to do those things. When we first looked at our UGB study area, we looked at all of the undesignated areas surrounding the city, which was about 1,557 gross acres. So that's before you take out things like constrained lands from floodplain and reservoirs. Let's see. We also, toward the beginning, excluded the south sub area A, as we called it, which is the Air Acres development, because of their restricted covenants and development patterns that wouldn't be likely to change in the next 20 years. There's an analysis of that in the UGB report. Okay. I mean, you guys have seen the planning commission has seen a lot of these slides, and if anyone has attended the work sessions or the other PAC meetings, we have shared these graphics. So nothing new here, but just pulling it all together into one place. So when we analyze the UGB study area, so that 1,557 acres, to determine where we want to make our 855 acre polygon, we have to look at the efficient accommodation of the identified land needs. So how can we efficiently accommodate that residential need and that employment need? How can we do that in an orderly and provide an orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services? Oh, there we go. So making sure that, okay, great. Perfect. So there on the screen is the 1,557 gross acres. You put it on display mode. And anything outside of that area, we were not able to go for, you can see where it says rural reserves, the gray demarcated lots are where we could not consider expanding the city limits. The green are undesignated. So we did not have any urban reserves near the city, which would be a priority place to look for expansion. We did have the undesignated locations that are in the mint green on the screen. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, once we start looking at how we do that, we divided the surrounding areas into 5 subcategories and started analyzing them based on the items listed here: the efficient accommodation of the need, the orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services. And where that one really came into play is once we said we couldn't serve the Air Acres area, which is hashed out on the lower left portion of the slide, we did need to look south to south sub area B, where that is called exception land, and that is where you look first for extending your UGB. So that did qualify for provision of services and for development, potentially as an employment type land use. And then on the eastern portion, that is the area that is probably easiest to serve with orderly and economic provision of services. There's already a lot of public utilities and transportation networks that are set up in this area. So that would be the next area that would be easier to develop on a shorter time frame. And then we look to the north, where we have residential land that has developed adjacent, recently the Bryn Hill master plan area. So then we look to see what kind of residential development can be further developed to the north. And then to the west, this has the longest time frame for provision of services because it's the least connected to the current city infrastructure, but does make a lot of sense for employment type uses. Then we look at environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences and compatibility with nearby ag and forest activities, which most of all these areas scored relatively close on those analyses. Next slide, please. So this is the PAC recommendation. The green line is our study area that we just saw in the mint green tax lots. And the dashed purple line is the proposed UGB study area. So 855 net acres. The polygon itself is slightly larger than that because it does include some constrained lands like floodplains and a reservoir. But the purple dashed line is where we would look to draw the line to move forward and say, this is where our city is going to expand. With the exception of the corner just north of Eric, right? We needed to update the triangle. Is that right? We're showing right now that it's in, but it's actually out, the triangle we've been talking about. Right. So we've been talking about this piece here that has come to our attention that is not in the current UGB where the mapping had been showing it located within. So because we did not have a chance to analyze this area, we are proposing that the line follow the current UGB in this location because we weren't able to look at that parcel as part of this project. So there would be, yeah, and we would look at that at a future expansion, UGB expansion process standalone. And so we will update this map before we go forward to City Council to notify that that change has happened. So with this expansion, the south sub area is approximately 34 acres. The east sub area is about 412 acres. So south sub area, I know on the Zoom you can't see, but south sub area south of 26, 34 acres. East sub area 412, including that piece there. North sub area about 90 acres. That's here. And then west sub area about 319 acres. Next slide, please.
Real assessment is.
So the UGB PAC was not able to come up with this line without making some assumptions about land uses. And again, we're not looking to adopt these land uses at this time. We'll further determine this during concept planning, but to be able to make a reasonable estimate of where the UGB should expand, we did have to make some assumptions. So shown on your map, there is the blue areas are employment and the yellow areas are residential. So in the east sub area, so in the south sub area, we have identified entirely as employment, and this relates to not wanting to put residential on the other side of Highway 26 and having easy access to the interchange here for employment type uses. In the east sub area, we have residential shown here adjacent to the current Sunset Ridge development with an employment area beneath and a small buffer along the school on Pilati Ridge there. This area would likely be a higher density type residential to increase the school enrollment, as well as give some park potential near the floodplain that's shown there in the hashed line. Employment and commercial south of Sunset Ridge, Highway 26 supports the City Council priorities of increasing the tax revenue and reversing the bedroom community's status, as well as increasing job opportunities for residents. It's the quickest potential for development for employment land is your 291 acres to the south of Sunset Ridge there. So the city does anticipate that that area would be able to develop the soonest and help with those tax base and job opportunity issues. In the north sub area, so the 90.1 shown in yellow here, there is the reservoir there that could be part of a community park. This would likely be a residential area, a little less dense, larger lots, incorporating the community park. There was some concern noted in the PAC meetings with not completing the Bryn Hill roadway network. So Bryn Hill has stub out roads here and here. And that would be better than focusing the development to the west. But in order to fully get land around this community amenity, the majority of the pack was had this as the configuration rather than flattening this line out here, which can be done at a later date. The west sub area here is an area that overlaps with some of the SB4 candidate land, as you saw in some of the testimony provided in writing. We can go to the next slide. I can show that. So we did provide this map to the governor and to the committee looking at state sites for accommodating a 500-acre site for semiconductor and related uses. And it really is this west area that North Plains has in contiguous availability to provide 520 net acres of development. So that's a separate process that we don't have certainty on right now. So we want to mention it because it's in the letters that are submitted and it's been discussed at the PAC meetings and at the joint work session. But we are moving forward. If you go back a slide, please, Steve. We are going back. We are recommending that we stick with the boundary we have now that is based on the land need in the EOA and the HNA. The one other, I think that's all the concerns that were listed. One other piece was a concern with the roadway networks in Sunset Ridge, and these are residential roadways, so perhaps continuing some residential to connect those and complete those streets in a residential configuration while bringing Pacific Street across to connect to Jackson School Road from current downtown area. And that is that is something that can be considered during concept planning, but the PAC saw it as blue for that ease of development for employment land for the bedroom community status. Okay, we can go forward 2 slides.
Okay.
So here, in your second public hearing, we'll be talking about your comprehensive plan text amendment. This actually does have changes based on the HNA and the UGB expansion report, but to be able to link it in with one of the documents, we connected it with the UGB expansion. So that was in your packet this evening. There are changes throughout the documents. We copied the whole document into the packet this evening. Next slide, please. The first public hearing will focus on the housing needs analysis that was updated in April of 2022. The housing needs analysis, like we said, is based on the PSU Population Research 2020 estimates. The land need identified in the HNA was carried forward into the EOA report. And the HNA update is proposed for adoption concurrently with the UGB expansion, but as we said, we'll keep it as a separate hearing. Next slide, please. And then finally, your second hearing this evening will be to move forward a recommendation on the final report for the UGB expansion, as well as the comprehensive plan text amendments that were in your packet this evening. Next slide, please. I think we covered that one already. Oh, I do need to say though, Planning Commission is being asked to make a recommendation of approval to the City Council on the housing needs analysis April 2022 update. The Planning Commission's recommendation will be heard by the City Council in a public hearing on June 5th, 2023. And then I have a slide, one more slide for the next steps. Once the City Council has conducted their public hearing and gone through the process, Washington County has a similar process because these lands are currently within county jurisdiction. So they will also need to adopt the UGB as part of the North Plains UGB and remove it from Washington County jurisdiction. Once that occurs, the report is submitted to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. There's a 21-day objection filing period. Once that period expires, the DLCD director issues a decision This is within 120 days of the date that they received the full submittal. And then the Land Conservation and Development Commission will conduct a meeting to acknowledge the DLCD director's decision on that. So there's still quite a bit of process after the local city process, but we are on the path and moving toward it. And that is it for the presentation. So happy to take any questions. We can certainly stay focused on the H&A, but we will answer UGB questions as well and make sure we cover those again at the next hearing.
For clarification on page 97 of the staff report, number 3 in the findings, it refers to a date of 2024. That is not the expansion date, right? Or is that?
What's the, excuse me, Chair King, what is the section of code?
It's in the goals,
Goals, okay, which goals?
14 urbanization, number 3.
2040. Yeah, so between now and 2040, so additional growth. Which is being proposed now. So this proposal would go through 2040. Right, based on the 2020 population estimates, that's right.
Any questions of the plan commission? Commissioner Van Dalen?
Nope.
Commissioner Howell?
I wanna understand why, if there's a possibility of selling conductor, there isn't in a study. We're going into why. There hasn't been a study of how much housing needs would be if that's semiconductor. So, how much, if the governor comes in and says, I want that property, how do we go about getting more property, or we just left in the dark, your study's no.
That's a great question, Commissioner Howe. Your housing needs analysis does look forward 20 years, but it's very unlikely that it will last you 20 years. So if and when the city's expansion for employment lands does build out and a greater need than anticipated is identified, you are able to update your housing needs analysis when you need to do that.
Anything else, Commissioner Howell? Commissioner Miller?
No,
Commissioner Cannadell?
no.
Commissioner Nunn? No. Commissioner Lawante? No. All right. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to testify on the housing needs analysis? Hearing none. Anyone on the Zoom?
I have no hands raised.
Okay. Let the record show there's no one on the Zoom. So is there any discussion by the commission? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing at 7:37. I'll entertain a motion. This will be in the form of a recommendation to the city council to a date certain, July or June 5th, right?
June 5th, 2023, thank you.
I'll move that the planning commission recommend approval of the city file number CPA 23-0562, updated housing needs analysis to the city council for a public hearing at the regularly scheduled meeting on June 5th, 2023.
A second.
All right, there is a motion for recommendation for approval to the city council to date certain, June 5th, 2023 for file number CPA 23-0562, housing needs analysis update. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to our second public hearing, which will be also legislative. And it is on the urban growth expansion. So I will open the public hearing at 7:38 for city file number CPA 23-0561, which is the urban growth expansion. So, at this time, Commissioner Van Dam, you recuse yourself from the hearing?
I will.
Okay, and so if I could get the staff report.
I have.
Oh, sorry. I got way
She
ahead.
doesn't want to miss that.
Yeah, it's really here. It's the same thing.
Yeah, just change the final. The North Plains Planning Commission will conduct a legislative public hearing regarding file CPA 23-056 urban growth boundary and comprehensive plan text amendment. The order of business will be as follows. The commission chair will open the public hearing and request the staff report. The commissioners may ask questions at any time during the public hearing. Any written correspondence submitted on behalf of this item will be orally presented, including the individual's name and address. The public will be invited to provide oral and written testimony on the proposed urban growth boundary and comprehensive plan text amendment. Additional staff comments will then be presented. The commission chair will call for commission comments and discussion. The commission chair will close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a specific time and date. All persons testifying shall be deemed parties to the proceeding and must provide their name and full correct mailing address, or if preferred, their email address. Parties will be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the code and state law. The city municipal code, zoning, and development standards specify applicable criteria to be relied upon in making a decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact, or to other city or state land use standards that the person testifying believes applies to the proposed urban growth boundary and comprehensive plan text amendment. Failure to raise an issue in person or in writing with sufficient detail to afford the hearing body and parties to the hearing an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals.
Thank you. Before you open the public hearing, so could I get the staff report?
Sure. So thank you, Chair King. Heather Austin again. Yep. We don't have an additional presentation because we covered the UGB expansion report in the H&A presentation, but we did pull up the graphic here of the recommended purple dash UGB expansion line that's accompanied by the North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Expansion Final Report dated May 2023. It's in your packet this evening, and it does include all of the information that we talked about as far as how we analyzed the study area, how we determined the study area, how we analyzed it, and how we ultimately moved through for determining this expansion area. Again, no land uses are going to be moved forward at this point. So really the UGB expansion report and this map in particular is an empty polygon, and then the concept planning stage is where we fill the polygon in. But this polygon does, with some base assumptions by your project advisory committee, does fit all of the identified land needs for the planning horizon. So we are happy to take questions and facilitate discussion on this.
Okay, I just have one thing that I've noticed here on page 57 of the staff report. And the best I can tell you is, or I guess page 40 of that report, but it's on 2A, orderly economic provision and public facilities and service transportation.
Is it packet page 57, Chair?
Yes, package
Okay.
page 57.
Okay. Oh, okay, I got it. Okay, got it. We can see it.
There's enumeration of different sub items A through I,
Yes.
and just wondering why G and H are crossed out in this report.
I don't know.
Okay, so it appears to me this analysis was prepared by Kittleson and Associates. It appears to me that they listed all of the objectives from chapter 660, but determined that G and H were not relevant to this process. That's my assumption, but I don't know for certain.
I'll just bring up one of my concerns as being on the pack for the UGB expansion, that there is the map of the employment lands and the residential lands, which was referred to as option D, or option 2, excuse me. And just reiterate my concerns about the residential and the Ridgeview subdivision, because they're showing that as employment right now in blue. And there are 4 residential streets that go into that area. And as you mentioned in concept plans, that could be corrected, but I want to make that known that that's still a concern. And I think some of the other commissioners that were on the PAC also shared that concern.
Thank you, Chair King. Steve, do you want to go to the map that I think forward? Yeah, this one. So Chair King is referring to the area south of Sunset Ridge here and completing the street network pattern in residential development. So extending the yellow a little further. I think the concept planning time is the perfect time to discuss that. And if you did end up doing that, then you're accommodating this employment area elsewhere, and you do have some opportunities, perhaps it straddles the road up here or something. It was left this way by the PAC because of the development ready potential of this as employment land, but we definitely heard the concern that we'd like to see the current residences have a buffer of more residential to the south there. So yes, noted, and concept planning, you would be able to make that happen. I don't believe the boundary needs to change to accommodate that change.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Lamont.
I have a few things. I apologize. I was not in attendance of all the meetings. I only made it to one of them, so I don't know all the reasons why the boundaries were chosen the way they were. But I'm just wondering, why the focus of putting residential around the pond, just north of North Avenue. Hillsborough did Dawson Creek around the pond, and it's just a beautiful area. So I don't know why we're focused in that. And I don't know why we left Pumpkin Ridge out. What a great revenue stream when the city keeps talking about trying to balance their housing with actual revenues with commercial properties. My gosh, that's a huge tax revenue right there. City of Banks just did it. They brought in Quail Valley to the city limits. So I don't know why we're missing out on that opportunity. And I'm very disappointed we didn't correct our boundary north of the highway. I brought it up numerous times, and now potentially 20 years down the road, we'll look at it again. I just don't understand it.
So I'll take each of those individually. The question about expanding in employment land rather than residential, the PAC did discuss this area for both types of uses, but there has been a plan since Bryn Hill was originally conceptualized that residential would continue north to include this area, and this would be where your larger lot residential could occur, because it is further from your city center, and then you'd have some more dense residential here. The other piece is that, you know, this being employment shovel, you know, not quite shovel ready, but very easy to develop, all things considered, having available utilities and roadway network. And then this area has both the large parcel going for it as far as employment land expansion, as well as having property owner communication with the city as far as interest of developing those parcels. There has not been okay, so my colleagues are mentioning that the Pumpkin Ridge starts north of our study area. So we weren't able to go that far north anyway, but that the full expansion of Bryn Hill, you know, does show a full community development over a certain time period. I think it was a 50-year plan that Rudy.
Right, but that was just their plan, it wasn't.
That was their plan, absolutely. But it did make a certain amount of sense to have residential near a community type park and have that asset there. So that was where the PAC decided that, as well as keeping these larger lots for employment to the west, as well as some connectivity to the next interchange to the west, being a draw potentially for employment development on the larger lots. So that was where the differentiation between employment and there. At the joint work session, I think for the first time, or maybe I just missed it before that. So by that point, we had already looked at the different sub areas, so we weren't able to add it in that short of a time frame. But I hear you're saying you said it for several years. Steve, do you have any information about that? I mean,
we did receive some information from the county on that strip. It was quite interesting. It looks like that property was originally platted back. Well, actually, the larger parcel that triangle was part of was platted with the North Plains 1910 plat. Between 1910 and 1961, that little triangle was added to the parcels that were platted in 1910. And then in 1963, when the city was incorporated, this is the boundary that they chose for some reason.
Right, because it was the boundary. You gotta remember, this was all done prior to the highway.
Yes, and we have seen that the highway, that piece was associated a little bit with Highway 26. But we don't have the full picture right now from the county on kind of, you know, what could have precluded them from wanting to add that in 63 to the city when it was originally incorporated. And again, as our consulting team has mentioned, just we're a little late in the process right now to pull that into this, but we are paying attention to it. And I think it is the city's intentions to come back after this is done and annex that property, that little triangle, into the city. So it is all one parcel that's inside the city.
So they'll have to continue to go to both county and city for any permits.
At the time being, yes. Right now, though, I don't see really much development potential on that triangle. They have a rather large outbuilding on it. Pardon?
The lot itself could be partitioned, and this will not allow that.
Potentially, you know, it actually is two lots already combined from the 1910 plat. So there potentially is, you know, the opportunity to divide it further, but there's so much development on that property right now. You have to move some structures around to really get your lines back in the original configuration of just the parent parcels from 1910. But yes, it is something we're paying attention to and would like to correct.
So I guess my last question is the boundaries that were chosen by the PAC committee, they were all driven by owners? The owner, whatever the owners wanted, that's the way we did it rather than what the city wanted?
no, I think it started with exception lands, as we're required to look at those first, but then the biggest driver I heard was the bedroom community offset and trying to find where we can put employment land that has the most potential to be built. And so we really focused in on the area south of the highway, the area in the east. The biggest driver I heard was how do we get more tax revenue and more jobs in the city? And so that was where we started.
That's my.
I have a question about the 500 acres that you have hashed out right there. So I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but part of that comes over the railroad tracks. And would they ever develop that 500 acre piece across railroad tracks like that?
I'm sorry, I can't read numbers. Which one are you talking about?
There's a small triangle that's a commercial break.
Hashed area, Steve, maybe if you go to the next map, you can see it in the blue. So the area that's south of the railroad
I can't see that one big corporation would develop that also. Now it got broken up into multiple pieces, then I could see it, but.
So, Commissioner Kemp, to answer that question, the semiconductor task force has identified 500 acre or more site needs. Were not just for one single type user that would take on an entire 500 acre site. It was also for a large site that could be planned for a variety of supply chain or other smaller users. And within that would be need for different size of acreage in different locations, and including potential laydown yard or whatever kind of low density use might be necessary, parking, what have you, in support of any of that. And so south of the railroad could potentially be one of those ancillary uses. I don't think the city, I certainly don't, and I don't think the city has ever marketed or the goal or expectation was that we would be the A or the key 500 acre user, but we would potentially be able to have a site where a number of probably larger firms could be and do different things. And that's what that west side represents. I would agree with you though, that if we thought we were the place for a 500 acre site user to be, south of the railroad would be it. but I think that the other type of use with the 500 acre need, I wouldn't rule it out, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Conley?
Well, I always have the same concern as I was on the committee, and I didn't agree with the adoption of the plan that's there now, and I understand that it's not in stone, but the problem for me is that very similar to the little triangle piece of property that got forgotten about during the process that got brought up, I know, a couple of years ago, actually. And so will the process when it gets to the concept planning, that they forget about some of the things that the other members of the PAC had kind of had concerns about. So I'm kind of concerned about adopting something that isn't more in the direction of some of the other people on the committee. So I guess, and later going, well, we didn't know that. And so not having that, some of those concerns addressed, I guess.
So would your comment change that purple, maybe go back to the map of the purple dashed line? Because we are really only looking to adopt the purple dashed line or make a recommendation on
Yeah,
it.
it's inside the purple dashed line. I just
Right.
always thought that the little sliver of land for the residential area, and when things change, you have to put it somewhere else, right? So if we take it out of the employment needs, then we got to put it somewhere else, which means that if we had residential there on the south side of the east expansion there, then we have to take some of that and put it somewhere else, right? So I just would like to see a little better plan, I guess, so.
Well, again, that is the concept planning stage. When you start the concept planning process as a city, you're going to start with your boundary and your land needs that are identified in your UGB. And like, this is your acres and this is your boundary. Where do the puzzle pieces
I
go?
totally understand that, but I'm talking about what gets lost later on, is a problem that I have all the way along in lots of decisions that get made, is that later on we find out that you can't change this for some reason, or we didn't know about this, or those kind of things. No guarantee I'd be on the concept planning, I guess, is so why, that's one of my concerns, is that there would be an issue with that from the beginning, I guess, so.
Any other questions?
That's it.
Commissioner Miller?
Just one question. In the letter from the Thousand Friends of Oregon, they called out, the fact that they didn't feel the orderly and economic provisions for public facilities and services. But like to hear from you, how did you address that piece, specifically the economic impact?
Commissioner Miller, that particular comment by Thousand Friends references the requirement of the Goal 9 economic opportunities analysis to in some way discuss need for and planning for infrastructure, likely public facilities capabilities for the employment land need that is identified, and then drives the need for the boundary that's being discussed tonight. That information was deemed adequately addressed by the Department of Land Conservation and Development in their approval of our economic opportunities analysis last fall, and was later adopted, recommended for adoption by this body, and adopted with a comprehensive plan text amendment by City Council. Thousand Friends apparently did not review that information to see that the Department of Land Conservation and Development deemed that information complete. So I think we would view that as our friends at Thousand Friends should review that information.
Okay, thank you. That answers
Okay, Commissioner Howard?
Why the 34 acres on the south side of the highway with no facilities? I'm dumbfounded with that.
So in the ranking of where a city has to look to expand its urban growth boundary, it by state law first must look at exception lands. Exception lands are those areas that are rural but have urbanized uses on them in rural character, but are outside of an existing city UGB. Everything to the west of, everything south of Highway 26, west of Glencoe Road, north of Beach, east of Gordon, all of the kind of triangle up to south of the trapezoid south of Highway 26. Thank you, Heather, or Steve, thank you, Steve. All of that are the only exception lands that North Plains has abutting it that was undesignated and outside of our urban growth boundary. And so we by state law had to look there and do our best to try to add land south of the highway unless there were very valid reasons of being able to exclude any of that for whatever reason. And the acreage that has been recommended for inclusion south of Highway 26, we couldn't dismiss. We couldn't dismiss that. And so we're including it, and being near the highway during the concept planning phase, I have no doubt there will be some type of employment uses appropriate on that site, but we couldn't exclude it. So just the idiosyncrasies of the labyrinth that is Oregon land use planning law, I'm afraid.
I know we've always argued because we didn't have facilities over there, so that was one of the big things for us. That's what I wanted to know.
No, it's a great question, and it, in that respect, is very similar to everything else actually that we're looking at bringing in with this recommended boundary, and that is none of it is serviced. And frankly, an important part of the scope of work of the concept planning process that begins in July, that ODOT is going to be paid for us, is to plan infrastructure and identify its cost. The funny thing about this process is that for a city that has its own UGB, we really can't dig into that topic very much until we have expanded our boundary. Then we can begin to look at the land that we've added and say, okay, what's this gonna cost and how are we gonna pay for it? But until it's inside, we really can't get into those details, I'm afraid. So that's kind of how that worked out.
Commissioner Duncan?
I did have another question that kind of comes to mind when we were expanding, or the UGB expansion, the last time was on Britton Hill. I know that some of the issues we had last time was where they drew that line, whether it be at the center of the road or on the edge of the road, and Heather probably remembers that more than anyone else. How big is this purple line? How wide is this Crayola? Does it go to the center of the road? Does it go to the other side of the road? Is it on one side of the road or not? And does it meet our needs of what we, to get over what we did last time? Does that make sense?
There's very few roads that are on the boundary line. For example, you got Jackson School Road. That would most likely be to the center of the road on that street, and correct me if I'm wrong. And then your other one is, remember that name, Mountaindale Road. And the preference there would most likely be to just go to the north side of that road. As you can see, the rest of the road is brought in. All
Right, so there's Bluestone,
project.
there's Mountaindale, there is Jackson School,
Right. And then we have that little corner of Gordon.
So I just want to make sure that we're talking about, we're going down to point whatever in acres. I want to make sure that we're actually capturing the right data there too.
I completely agree. The goal is to bring in as much street as you can when you do this, so you can get the whole street improved, to the extent, possible. And like I was saying, except for that north side of Northwest Mountaindale, that's on the extreme west side, that would be a portion where, right now we don't have the north side of that road in the UGB, so that road might not get a full improvement. Jackson School, would be to the center line. So we could get a half street improvement there. I am aware that Hillsborough was looking over that area as well, so they could pick up the east side of that road. That portion of Gordon that's down there in that southeast corner or southwest corner by the highway would be a portion of street that, would not be entirely in, that wouldn't get that benefit. So there are a few streets there that aren't entirely in the boundary, but again, there's only so much land we're allowed to propose to bring in. And so to the best of our ability, we try to capture all the streets.
Just want to make sure we drew the line properly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other commission questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Levante.
Just to follow up on your comment, Hillsborough's planning to come butting up to our boundary? I didn't think they could because we're a satellite city.
There's just been some information out there showing some concepts and they're looking very close to our boundaries.
I can actually specifically address that. The city of Hillsborough asked the legislature and got under some bill for the ability to urbanize land in what the Grand Bargain made rural reserves. With SB4, they can reverse that, make them urban reserves and urbanize all the way up Jackson School Road, up to Highway 26.
Up to Highway 26, so not north of Highway 26.
Not-
I would say, because we actually met with the city several years ago about this.
Highway 26 will continue to be a hard north stop to the city of Hillsborough. But with SB
There, I
4
mean, it's further, they've gone north of the highway.
yes, but yes, further east. But as far as along the Jackson School corridor, Highway 26
Is the border.
is a hard stop. Yes.
Thanks for clarifying.
Can I
Appreciate that.
clarify, what about the east side of Jackson School?
Well, over the creek.
On the north side of 26. But on the east side of Jackson School, right? There.
That remains outside of what they can do.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I just had one other question. It just dawned on me when we were talking about the west expansion area. Right now, there's a glider, airport there, if you will. I don't know what you want to call it. But do they have restrictions and stuff in order to operate that need to be addressed?
Commissioner Lottie, so the glider port is on a new 2-year lease with that property owner. And that property owner, that family doesn't intend for the glider port, or actually before this process even started. That property owner didn't intend to lease that area to the glider port for longer than 2 years. So we're looking at a situation where whatever we do, they weren't going to be there much longer.
Okay. So they don't have the same airport overlay for Washington County like Airview Cruise does?
They have the exact same status by the FAA as airport. In that they're recognized on a map as a place for very small craft to be able to land safely. What they don't have that airport does is any kind of overlay that has to do with, homes and hangars and access to the airport. The glider port is just that strip of land on a map. And because there isn't anything around it, like homes or anything, that isn't a similar issue. It's kind of different in that regard. Yeah, they're just an entity that leases from that farming family. And they won't be there my understanding is they should be there for longer than 2 more years.
I still have some clarification about it. So on Jackson School Road, as that develops there, and they have to do a half-street improvement there. And there's no more likely the east side of it is not going to develop so does that mean that we live with half-street improvement forever then?
What street were you talking about? I'm sorry. Jackson School. It depends on some of the uses that go in there. I mean, it could require some additional improvements. So we would coordinate with the county on that if development came in and had an impact on Jackson School Road, because it's a county facility. So again, it's going to depend on the impact of the use in terms of how much infrastructure they're going to have to provide. But in terms of the east side of Jackson School, it would not be addressed in this planning period. It would be in the future. Could it be 20 years? Potentially, could it be sooner? It's possible. Could it be longer? That's possible too. Or it's just going to be kind of a market-driven type of scenario based on how fast the proposal gets used up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chris Edmonds, if you want to come forward?
I need to turn that on.
Good evening. Is this connected? It's connected now. Good evening, my name is Chris Simmons, and I'm an authorized agent representing all of the landowners in the area that is contiguous to the east of McKay Creek, south of Northwest West Union Road, west of Jackson School Road, and north of Highway 26. And I simply wanted to testify to the record during this legislative hearing our deep gratitude for the exhaustive process that the city has undertaken over the last several years, the excellent consultant work that has gone into studying this. The city and the UGB Hack Committee has been responsive to concerns as they have been raised. Those concerns have been very minimal. We have been fully supportive of the city's process through all of this work. I simply just want to say that the PAC recommendation that is in front of you has been touched by so many hands in this city. And understanding that it's a labor of love from a lot of people within the city. And we very strongly support this formal recommendation that's in front of you today. And we would urge you to support it. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to testify? Come forward, please. Say your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Dyke Jones, 11220 Northwest Roy Road, Banks. My dad lives at 34203 Northwest Mountaindale Road. I am a farmer and caretaker and steward of the land in North Plains, Roy, and Banks. And tonight I want to remind the Planning Commission and staff and everyone here that the proposed UGB expansion includes the highest class soil in the state of Oregon. Literally anything can be raised on these soils. In reference to goal 14, factors 3 and 4, there are various components that will impact the other agriculture industries and businesses. When I read the North Plains agriculture and forestry compatibility, it was quite elementary. I'm not sure if there's been an update, but it is it needs some work. There's a lot of facts missing, and especially to have bolded on top the world-class soils that is in the proposal here. It's not just the traffic, the dust. Everyone who lives and farms off Mountaindale Road, for example, Dersham Road, will be impacted. It would be, I am in support of wise and efficient planning and urbanization. I don't understand why there would be housing projections in the chart that shows the blue and the yellow, why there would be residential when it's a bedroom community looking for employment. But also for the area from Dersham Road to the city of North Plains, that is all serviced by Tualatin Valley Irrigation District. I believe that, as Chair Labonte has mentioned, the Pumpkin Ridge Golf Course, that is already ruined farmland. So that would be a good place for any semiconductor development, etc. But the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District, the world-class, highest quality soils should not be developed irrationally and aggressively. This is a very aggressive proposal. And I ask you to please keep agriculture at the table, that any paved over farmland in North Plains will impact not only the rest of Washington County, but the state of Oregon. Again, my name is Jackie Dyke Jones. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Go ahead.
By chance, is that the only area that's in the Tualatin Valley Water District, is just the Mountaindale area?
It's been mentioned before many times about Senate Bill 4, and the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District submitted testimony alerting not only, well, specifically about the North Plains impact and why it should not be considered for semiconductor development because of the added cost it will be onto ratepayers like myself and others. So I can provide a map, and that I am concerned that the city of North Plains has not communicated with the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District. But it is from, I mean, it goes west up to a certain road. but I have maps.
So it's on the west side primarily.
It's the, yes, correct, the west expansion proposal.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to testify? Come forward. Say your name and address for the record.
My name is Eric Lawson, 32410 Northwest Wasco Street. I am the chair of the Economic Development Committee and was on the Project Advisory Committee for the UGB expansion process as well, representing the EDC. I just wanted to give testimony here of something I've written, and I can submit it following the public hearing. The North Plains Economic Development Committee has taken up the issue of the current UGB expansion study and the final report being reviewed by the Planning Commission. Additionally, a representative from the EDC has been on the UGB expansion project advisory committee throughout the 3-year-long process. After reviewing the thorough and diligent work of the city staff, fellow PAC members, public and private consultants, the EDC is supportive of the recommendation for City File CPA 23-056(1) urban growth boundary expansion and comprehensive plan text amendment. We support the Planning Commission recommending City Council to adopt as presented. The recommendation provides a well-balanced expansion of land that will benefit current and future residents as well as the current and future economy of the city. Along with bringing in more available land for job creation, the proposal helps reverse the trend of North Plains becoming a bedroom community by bringing jobs within city limits. I just want to list a few points the EDC is focused on in our evaluation of the UGB expansion process. And we feel the recommendation provides sufficient land options to achieve goals such as an industrial focus held on the west side of town near the Dersham Road Highway 26 exit, as that would help lessen any industrial traffic from residential areas. Traffic flow driven into the downtown area, but not residential areas, as the city concurrently works on downtown revitalization efforts. And lastly, incorporation of a community park around the existing lake in the northwest region of the expansion area to help bring balance between the downtown revitalization effort as well.
If you can submit your letter over with, Lori, that would be great.
Any questions with the testimony? Yeah, thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Hearing none, is there anyone on the Zoom wishing to testify?
Not seeing any hands right now.
Okay, just a couple final comments before we close the public hearing. Obviously, at the 11th hour, we received 3 letters that were brought into the testimony. One from the city of Hillsborough, one from Thousand Friends, Oregon, and one from Costa Pacific Communities. Not sure if all the commissioners had a chance to read them since they came in so late, but I want to ask staff, and I'll start. I'm going to ask the same question, so I just want response from each one of you. So staff, as far as 3J, finance director, our planner, and our mayor as our ex officio, with these in front of us, should the planning commission consider their impact prior to moving forward, or are we comfortable moving forward the way things are?
Excuse me, Chair and Commissioners, we are comfortable with our analysis. Many of the comments address the adequacy, whether or not certain aspects of the analysis are adequate. We followed the state guidelines that we had before us. Oftentimes, that guidance is vague. So we took it upon ourselves to determine what was an adequate process and analysis to meet those state requirements. So I think a lot of what you see before you in the letters are more opinion than reason for the planning commission to delay any action.
Chair King, I would agree with that assessment. I am going to, in comment right now, respond to a couple of them. Number one, very specifically, the city of Hillsborough letter are a series of questions that they would like the city of North Plains to think about in the view of the city of Hillsborough as it considers this boundary expansion. In the reality of those questions from my friend Colin Cooper, the planning director of the city of Hillsborough, my friend confuses the fact that North Plains has its own urban growth boundary and its own process, and it's not part of Metro, and does not have to meet all of the considerations and criteria that a city like Hillsborough must for its urban reserves planning process. Two very different things. So I thank the city of Hillsborough for their questions, but I would just remind our friends there that North Plains has its own urban growth boundary and a very different process that's set up to be not as complicated, quite frankly, particularly for a city like North Plains that has fewer than 5,000, 10,000, even 15,000 residents. Rules change slightly as you get more residents, but right now, we don't have to do any of the considerations that Hillsborough is asking, perhaps we should. As far as the Thousand Friends letter, I would just add that the first half of the letter has comments and opinions about SB4 and North Plains' industrial lands look. And the reality is that what's before you is an urban growth boundary expansion that's informed by an economic opportunities analysis that was done and adopted by the city before SB4. Nowhere in statute, nowhere does the state of Oregon require that cities consistently and constantly update their own documents as legislation passes, and whether or not that new legislation of any kind might affect how the city should think about its urban growth boundary. So our friends at the Thousand Friends of Oregon are confused about what the city does and how it manages its own urban growth boundary, particularly outside of the Portland metro region. So I would agree with Mr. Faust about the fact that there are opinions, but really no founded reasoning for not moving forward, given what they raised as questions in their letter as well.
It's good to go third when you get those good analysis like that. I really can't expand on that. I agree completely with our finance director, particularly when it relates to the Hillsborough letter. I know that he has been in close conversations with Colin, and I think maybe there's a little bit of jealousy there that we're not part of Metro. You know, we don't have to go through the same process that they do, and they would like us to try and jump on that bandwagon. But everything we've done up to this point satisfies state law. And so I'll just leave it at that. And as far as Thousand Friends, I concur with our consultant that I think they're making a lot of assumptions right now, because Senate Bill 4 is brand new territory for everybody, and we certainly don't know what that impact's going to be. But as our finance director mentioned, this proposal, this recommendation from the PAC is supported by our economic opportunities analysis, which is really the driver for, you know, determining our land need for the economic land. So I just think it's a lot of assumptions right now on Thousand Friends part.
So I'm the cleanup hitter, is that what I am? Chair King, thank you so much for your question. Really appreciate that. I also have been a part of the PAC and part of these conversations for the last 3+ years. And I have to agree with staff and as far as our process and the process that we followed. We've been very communicative with the community and the region at large. We have been very transparent in our process. We have communicated with DLCD religiously on a regular basis during this process, and them to us as well. And I have not, receiving these letters late in the day, I too have not had, I've given them a once over, but not a full digest. But I think as far as North Plains is concerned, we have what's the right word, how to say, we have the right to expand. We have the ability to be able to put a vision out there for our community for the next 20 years. And by not being a metro, this is, I mean, it's a very common knowledge, especially in meetings that I go to, and a lot of times in these meetings, everything is metro focused, and it rarely does it sort of address the needs of rural communities and our community in general. So for us to go through this process for the last 3+ years, and not just checking boxes, but really diving deep into what we envision for our community for the next 20 years, hats off to our staff and our consultants, and equally hats off to the volunteers who have sat in these meetings and who have given feedback to make this community a livable community where we can work, live, and play. You know, when you dive into the numbers and look at the numbers and you realize how many people in this community leave this community on a daily basis to go work and spend their money somewhere else, right? I want to see North Plains aspire to have an economic future, and a better balance for our tax base, of course, but an economic future where people can live, work, and play in their community. So I think that I want to see us as leaders continue our process. I want us to continue to be partners in Washington County and partners in the region and partners in the state to make North Plains one of the best communities in the state. And I think we're on that trajectory.
Okay. My concern, of course, is with the 1,000 Friends and the Hillsborough is that we've been, like you said, doing this for 3 years. They could have been there at the very beginning and apparently weren't. And so I'm not sure why this is coming across at the last minute, other than just try to baffle us, I guess. So I know I'm one of the people that was involved in the last urban growth expansion in the late 90s, and 1,000 Friends was there from day one. And so for them to come in at the last minute, I just don't understand that at all. So Commissioner Levante, you had a question?
I did. This is for staff. Is there, I know we have scheduled for these to be forwarded to City Council for their June 5th meeting. Is there a rush for this? Is there a reason why we can't pause, fix the south boundary along the highway, along the Ochoa property? Why we can't, fine tune some things, maybe look to see why, or if anybody's talked to the 12th Valley Water District, see how this might impact them. I just feel like there's a few loose ends that does it take us another month to push it through? Does it make it better? Is there a timeline that we're crunching this for?
Commissioner Lamont. There we go. It's on. Commissioner Lamont. Yeah, I guess it's a little complicated. There are some things going on where a recommendation to council sooner rather than later would be great. And one of those is the concept planning process that ODOT is going to manage, work with us on. They really want to kick that off in July, and they're assuming that our process is all done. As far as recommending, in the city council hearings a boundary, that process kind of assumes that we're done or very near done. One thing you could do, and Steve will disagree with me, Steve and Heather might disagree with me, but one thing I think you probably could do is make a recommendation on the boundary with the recommendation that the little triangle be fixed and have them handle that, but make that part of the recommendation. From different things that are going on that we're trying to manage from a city perspective, it would be unfortunate if the process delayed because of kind of that one thing that I think there's a separate process can handle. If that makes sense.
Is there a way to zoom in on that map to kind of better define where the boundary is gonna be when it comes down to location and roadways like Doug was referring to earlier? Because the current boundary is all over the place. It doesn't actually follow a center line, it follows the donation land claim, which obviously is not in the center line at all, especially on the west side. The east side on Jackson School follows the original property boundaries of the Sunset Ridge development. Of course, now there's been additional road dedication with that subdivision, so that line is slightly skewed, if not in the center, and it's not on the west side. So it just seems like we should finalize all this before we move it forward and have a decent line rather than nilly-willy all over the place again.
Commissioner Monty, I want to ask Steve and Heather, is it possible to move this forward as a recommendation to the city council also with the condition that road lines be fully elaborated? For consider between now and June 5th for council consideration?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, you're just confirming that we would zoom into such a level that we're following road center lines where the intention is to follow road center lines with the purple dashed line.
If that's what you're going for is road center line, it just, when it comes down to it, somebody's gonna have to write a legal description to be submitted with the annexation to the UGB, so somebody's gotta write the description, so now's the time to define where that line gonna be. And if you're just
Yeah.
defining it, at such a high level, I can't tell where you're at. Or if it meets the current UGB boundary, because it is quite odd.
Yes, so some further description as well that could go forward to the city council saying, in the west along Mountaindale, the intent is the line to follow the north side of the road or the south side, and then Jackson School Road, the intent is to follow street center line and sort of
Something to just
give a narrative, a non
the west area, because right now there's nothing, it's just the west area. Well, what is that?
We could do that we could do that in kind of the packet for city council.
Is it easy enough to say on Jackson School, it just goes all the way to the UGB potential boundary? Like it goes as far as it can?
It includes the entire expansion study area.
Yeah, it includes the entire expansion area.
Yes, although I would have to then verify what the expansion study area boundary line was drawn on, but yes. And then I'd want to have a narrative description of that as well.
Okay.
Yes, but the intent is to include the entire east side expansion study area. On the east, not including nature's needs. Or, ecology, yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, while we're adding to our wish list, if we can have ODOT put access to the Gordon Road.
You're here, just ran out of wishes, sorry.
Chair, can you actually comment about that a little bit? For this body. So what we've actually heard, and again, we support reminding ODOT about this point, any opportunity we can get. But what I will say is that what ODOT has said is that just for the body and moving forward, Gordon Road likely will never be an off ramp off of Highway 26 onto Gordon. But it's because of the 1 mile limit rule. But what it could possibly be is an on-ramp onto Highway 26 from Gordon. That, from a safety and engineering standpoint, is possible. But to slow down on Highway 26 and to exit at Gordon is what is restricted by that 1 mile limit. But getting onto the freeway from Gordon is a long-term money issue, not a policy possible issue, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Did any of the other commissioners have comments on concerns about the letters we received late? No?
And what about the 12th Valley Water District? Question.
The irrigation, sorry, the irrigation.
Oh,
No,
excuse me.
no, it's okay.
Sorry.
Homes district around and water involved, right? No, that's a completely understood. So, as far as the process goes, working with them and considering any issues with them really is triggered by land being in our UGB. It's not something that determines if the line can move somewhere or not. That conversation happens after, if that makes sense.
So at a city annexation level, not a UGB.
Before
annexation.
annexation, yeah. Like the report that 3J did and everything that's required by goal 14, goal 5, in that report goes to, even though Thousand Friends' opinion is that it didn't do something enough on a few different points. They follow the rules in considering all of those things. And so we really don't have to make a boundary decision based on a district that doesn't even affect us yet, if that makes sense. Like, where would you draw the line with districts that are outside of our UGB? You know what I mean? Like, they're the closest ones, but they're outside. They're not an issue until that land's brought in.
Yeah, because I think they're one of the districts that we don't automatically withdraw when we annex to the city. It would have to be special.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I guess what I would say is we want to be good neighbors, and I wouldn't suggest that the city not be good neighbors on that issue. But from our perspective, they're one of many districts that are outside of consideration on some of those things until the UGB moves. And our report does address various issues related to all of that as required by statute. So I would hesitate recommending doing anything differently at this case, I would say.
Any other comments of the plan commission for a closed public hearing? Hearing none. Public hearing at 8:40.
Would you like this map to remain up, or would you like me to stop sharing?
I think you can shut it off. So, okay. I'll entertain a motion. This will be in the form of a recommendation to city council for date certain June the 5th, 2023.
I move to recommend to City Council file number CPA 23-056, the UGB and what was it? UGB and comp plan, thank you. For approval with the modifications of cleaning up the alignment on, do you want it identified by address or mountain tax?
Do you know the address?
Yes, it's 10105 Northwest 314th Avenue to be included in the UGB, as well as to ensure that all roadways are adequately taken in by the UGB expansion.
Or a second? Been moved by Commissioner Levante and second by Commissioner House for approval of the recommendation for approval to the city council to the date certain, June the 5th, 2023, with added modifications. Got that?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 8 is new business. Do we have any new business? Steve, any new business?
New business for the planning commission will be in June at their June 14th hearing, which will be the hearing for the spec warehouse building over at the Northwest West Union. We have been working hard on that application to get it ready for you, and looking forward to bringing it to you on June 14th.
Okay. Nothing else?
Pardon?
Correct. There's nothing else, then move on to item number 9, unfinished business.
Unfinished business is our sign code. I was really hoping to get that to you today. It didn't work out. But yes, I want to get that back before you. We've just had so many big issues, already coming at you that we're trying to not fill your plate up too much. If you would like, I can put that on as a work session item for June 14th. If you think it might be a big enough hearing and you already have enough materials to review for that hearing, then I can push it out to the following meeting.
What is the consensus of the planning commission? Workshop, or the public hearing?
I'm okay with workshop.
Everyone say the clock.
Okay, so we'll add it to the June 14th agenda as a work session item. And what we'll be going over then at that point will be the different zoning districts. We already did the definitions section. So we'll go through the specific zoning, residential, commercial, industrial, see if you guys have any tweaks for that. And then we'll put together a proposal to bring forward as a text amendment for you.
Great, thank you. No other unfinished business. We'll move to item number 10 is land use applications and city project monthly report. Has everyone reviewed those? Any questions? Okay. Beyond that, we have item number 11 is planning commission comments. Any questions, concerns, comment from the planning commissioners? Anything for city council? Okay, city council elected official, Madam Mayor, any comments to the planning commission?
No, just thank you very much for your work and your due diligence on, the HMA and the UGB.
Right.
Sorry, there is a dedication of the park up here, June 10th at 11 a.m.
11 a.m. All right. Item number 12 is staff comment.
Just a quick one because it was touched on at our last meeting. As you folks know, there was a change of ownership there with the Shell gas station to Space Age. And we did approve new signs for them. And as the result of that, we also asked them to remove the abandoned sign. And so as some of you may have seen, that sign has been cut down to the height where the security lighting was. So we allowed them to keep their security lighting and paint the pole. So it wasn't a rusty eyesore. So I think it turned out quite well. It's actually so low now that you can't even see the pole until you get up off the off ramp and can look down onto the property. So just wanted to update you on that progress.
Okay. Anything else?
Not at this time.
Okay. If there's no other planning commission business, our next regular meeting will be Wednesday, June 14th, with a workshop the same day at 6 o'clock with a regular meeting at 7 o'clock. With that, we're adjourned at 8:46.
Thanks, everybody.